Hello, here we go for the 17th episode of Sanibel Chronicles. I hope that all of you had a great 4th of July. I had an average holiday, not much going on here. Had the kids over for dinner and did a lot of visiting. Told a lot of old stories. And that's always fun to get together. We left off the last episode. I talked about the failure of the sea turtle head starting program at our sea turtle farm and how we had changed our program to basically field studies, protecting sea turtle nests, gathering data on individual turtles, just a general field research program. As I mentioned, we started tagging in 1964, and by early 1970, we had gathered quite a bit of data on the loggerhead turtles of Sanibel and Captiva, and we found that they were multiple nesters. Each female nested multiple times each season she produced eggs, and we found the average number of clutches per summer was about three nests per female. However, in I believe it was 1970, we found one female loggerhead that nested 6 times that year, and in those 6 nestings, she produced 920 eggs. There have been papers published telling us how loggerhead turtles can nest up to about 7 times. However, some of these data were statistical. The actual nesting events weren't witnessed. Egg tallies for each nest were not compiled. So I believe that loggerhead turtle, it was tagged CR140, I believe she holds the record for the productivity of a loggerhead turtle, 920 eggs in one season. That's an unusual number. They internest about every 11 or 12 days. And this has been found to be true events in all sea turtle species. I believe the green sea turtle has been documented nesting up to 9 times in one season. Collected on each individual female included the length and width of the carapace, the upper shell, and we did this in curvature measurements and also in straight line measurements. We even recorded the direction of the turtle's ingress and egress from the nesting site, whether she did a clockwise or a counterclockwise crawl. That was interesting to look at. The nests were marked and were tallied as the total numbers as they're doing now. The low point of nesting on Sanibel was back in 1970. I believe we only had 71 nests that year. So that was the low point for loggerhead nesting. And today, of course, loggerhead turtles deposit 400 to 500 nests per year on Sanibel, which is really a dramatic increase. By 1970, we had acquired a considerable amount of information on the turtles, and we knew what the cycles were on tagged females. A loggerhead typically nest every 2 years. However, some nested every year. But we didn't know what was going on in the years that they didn't nest, or where they were spending much of their time, whether they were using other sites for nesting. So in 1972, we decided to expand our program, and we found people up and down the Florida Gulf Coast who were interested in sea turtles, and we enlisted their help to develop programs such as ours on Sanibel and these other communities. And by 1975, we had sea turtle research units in about 15 localities between St. Vincent Island National Wildlife Refuge up in the Florida Panhandle to Cape Sable in Everglades National Park. And then in 1973, we started the special project at Sebastian Inlet on the East Coast. These extensions were done to increase the tagging and try to determine if our Sanibel captiva turtles were maintaining a fidelity for their nesting sites. And lo and behold, we found they weren't. We had turtles that moved 52 miles in a nesting season from one beach to another. And we found turtles that were tagged on Sanibel nesting on the East Coast, turtles that were tagged on the East Coast nesting on Sanibel and other Gulf Coast beaches. So we found that the loggerhead sea turtle was not as sincere in their nesting sites as turtles like the much studied green turtle. Other things that we did to gain more information on our sea turtles, we began to weigh them. Our sample of weighing loggerheads was done in the late 70s, and I think our sample was about a little less than 100 animals. The heaviest turtle that we weighed 345 pounds. This photograph that I'm showing now is the largest loggerhead turtle that I ever saw on the nesting beach. This is a photo of Richard Beatty kneeling beside a loggerhead. This was photographed in the days before we started weighing individual turtles. And this was the largest turtle that we measured on Sanibel in the 30-odd years that we conducted our studies. This turtle had a curvature length of 48 inches. And it's an enormous animal. We were unable to, two of us were unable to turn it over to restrain it from getting away while we tagged it. So this animal was never tagged. The tags we applied were Monell metal tags. They were a standard tag type that were used throughout the world for sea turtles. Some projects in other parts of the world use plastic tags, but like most American conservation loggerhead operations, we stuck with a Monell tag, and then years later they came out with an Inconel tag, and we never went to that type of tag because we never exhausted our supply. We tried about 80 animals, fitting them with a carapace tag. And these slides are the turtle being restrained, first of all, by an invention that we made called a turtle stopper. The first photograph is Ed Phillips demonstrating the turtle stopper. It's a piece of electric conduit bent like a large hairpin, and the two ends are pushed down in the sand in front of a turtle that has completed nesting and is headed back to the water, where she has to be restrained to collect the data. The points are forced down in the sand. The tubing is forced against the turtle's shoulders, and it's held in place. This next image is a turtle being held by the turtle stopper while I'm drilling a hole through his carapace to attach a stainless steel shell tag that we tried on about 80 different animals. And the next slide shows the application of the tag, and then finally the tag by itself. These were considered to be a backup way of marking the turtles, because quite often the Monell tags fell away, and we'd often find turtles with tag scars, and of course they were re-tagged with Monell tags, but we also applied these stainless steel tags. And then I mentioned we conducted weighing of the turtles. We had a large apparatus tripod that we'd set up and a little bit of netting. The turtle would be turned upside down over the netting. The tripod would be set up, and we had a 500-pound capacity scale, and we hoisted the turtles with a small block and tackle. And this first image is the late Jim Anholt, who worked on the Sanibel project for many years, and I raising a turtle up off the beach to read its weight. And of course, with the weighing, we also, as I mentioned, conducted measuring, and this is me with a set of large calipers getting straight line measurements of a turtle. And then in the next slide is a shot of me with another set of calipers measuring the size of a stranded dead loggerhead. We maintained the sea turtle stranding network data for Sanibel captiva. I would go out and respond to a dead turtle. I would collect the data, skull width, shell width, and length, and then I would take a spray can of paint and paint my initials on it. And then we had cut a deal with the city of Sanibel that, of course, we had no responsibility. We, at this time, I'm meaning the Fish and Wildlife Service, because I was doing the stranding work on my official time. The city would come and pick up the turtle carcass and move it to a spot on the refuge where it was left to decompose. And this went on for several years, and then the number of turtle carcasses that stranded on the beach increased in the 1980s, and the deal was changed that if a turtle was marked, initialed, it could be buried on the beach. So the city would have a tractor with a front end loader respond after we called it in, and they would bury the turtle on the beach. Just a side note I thought of, a turtle that's found in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'll talk about the different species later on, is known as the Kemp's Ridley. The Kemp's Ridley is probably the most endangered of all the sea turtles. It occurs, its nesting range is in the Gulf of Mexico, where at one time large populations gathered and deposited eggs in the daytime. Today they're still nesting in Mexico, and occasionally Kemp's Ridley's nest along the Gulf Coast of Florida. Sanibel has had a few nests in recent years, and they're also occasionally nesting on the lower Atlantic seaboard. But I did not see a Kemp's Ridley stranding on the Sanibel beach until 1971, when a large female washed in on the Lighthouse Beach. And then it was years later until the next Ridley showed up dead on the beach, and that was in the late 80s when the battle was on about turtle excluder devices to be used by shrimpers. And there was one period in the late 80s where suddenly Kemp's Ridleys of all sizes were washing in on the beach, from adults to juveniles down to almost the size of a dinner platter. And then it stopped. It stopped, I think, after the turtle excluded devices were mandated to be used in shrimp trawl nets after that law was passed by the federal government. During the time we had all of these satellite programs, we also had hatcheries, and this is a site we had at Cape Romano. Cape Romano is just south of Marco Island, and we had done some aerial surveys over Marco and saw there were quite a few nests each summer. So I think it was in 1969 or 1970, Ty Simrosky of Sanibel was a high school student, and his biology teacher, Bill Hammond, was a member of the board of directors of Coretta Research, and we enlisted Ty to camp at Cape Romano and do some early work on tagging and trying to protect turtle eggs. And that gave us the insight to do something a little more serious down there. So this slide is a shot of Doug Kennefick, and this is our Cape Romano sea turtle camp. We operated it for several years in the 1970s, and that wire covering in the foreground is a sort of an automatic releasing turtle egg relocation site, where the eggs are removed from the beach, from the natural nest, brought to this site, buried and covered with that 2x4 mesh welded wire. And this was relatively successful. Believe it or not, we had raccoons lift up the buried part of the wire that went down into the sand, but from my recollection, they never were able to reach a nest. So it was a successful way of increasing productivity for that Cape Romano beach. And before we started that work, predation on that beach was about 95% of the eggs were being eaten by raccoons. So we did some good there. And then, of course, we attended, our representatives attended major sea turtle meetings. This shot is one of Jim Anholt and I in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. State Department in 1979 when we attended an international conference on sea turtle conservation. Just about every sea turtle person in the world was in attendance. This next slide is just a group of the sea turtle volunteers that worked with Caretta Research along the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and it's a shot of our rolling stock. We had little all-terrain vehicles, and we had Jeeps. And I think at the height of our equipment availability, we had 3 boats. So we were giving the Gulf Coast a great deal of coverage, and we learned a great deal about loggerhead sea turtles. In the next episode, episode 18, I'll talk about the 5 different species of sea turtles that occur in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'll introduce, over the years, I saved a lot of commercial television footage on our operation. And I have several clips of that about our organization and about the work we did and things relative to sea turtles on Sanibel Captiva, like protecting eggs in hatcheries, dredging operations that went on Captiva that we were involved in. Just 3 or 4 news videos from local television channels that I think you'll find interesting. They were all shot, I guess it was over 40 years ago. So with that, I'll close this episode. If you have any comments, please leave them. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And I want to thank all of the people who have recently subscribed. I know an uptick from the last episode when I requested that you subscribe to enhance our footprint in the YouTube kingdom. So if you haven't done so, please do. And I also want to thank those of you that purchased my new book on Ponce de Leon, the Calusa Indians, and Sanibel Island. It's a brief history of what went on here a little over 500 years ago. So thank you for that. Thank you for subscribing. And thanks you very much for watching these episodes. So until next time, goodbye.